A question from the AP Calculus AB test from 2002, and it says the graph of the function f shown above consists of two line segments. Let g be the function given by g of x equals the integral from 0 to x f of t d of t.
For g of -1, since they give us that g of x equals the integral of f of t from 0 to x, we simply have to find the area from 0 to -1. So it would be the area in here. But that gives us improper notation as we get f of from 0 to -1 f of t dt. So we have to flip this and make it negative in order to get it the right notation. So the area of this, which is a triangle, is 1/2 base, which is 1, times the height, which is 1, 2, 3. So it's all divided by negative from here. So you get -3/2. So g of -1 equals -3/2. Okay, so for g prime of -1, we have to find g prime of x, which is the derivative of this antiderivative. So g prime of x equals, we simply plug in x back into the equation, so we get f of x. So g prime of x equals f of x. And since we already are given f of x for g prime of -1, we simply look for f of -1. So because g prime of x equals f of x, g prime of -1 equals f of -1, which equals 0. So g double prime of -1 equals something. And to find, we already found out that g prime of x equals f of x. So for the double derivative, we would be taking the derivative of g prime of x, making it g double prime of x, and the derivative of f of x, making it f prime of x. So we want to find g double prime of -1, we have to find f prime of -1. Another way to say derivative is slope. So we have to find the slope of f of x when x equals -1. So to do that, we do y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. And we would choose this point to be our -3 and -2, and this to be our first point, so minus y sub 2, which is 3, and minus x sub 1, which is 0, and we get -6 over -2, which reduces to 3. Therefore, g double prime of -1, which equals f prime of -1, is 3, since the slope at x equals -1 is 3.
So for part B, they're asking in what values of x in the interval from -2 to 2 is g increasing, and they're also asked to explain. So we know that g of x equals the antiderivative f of t, and to find where it is increasing we need g prime of x. So to find that is just g prime of x, and we know from that if we take the derivative of this, we'll also take the derivative of this, which will be f of x. And from that we can read from this graph, which is the f of x. And from just reading that, we know that from -1 to 1 is increasing, because g prime of x, if it's greater than 0, it is increasing, or if it's just less than 0, it's decreasing. The justification would be that g of x is increasing from -1 to 1, because g prime of x equals f of x is greater than 0 on this interval.
Part C is asking for what values of x in the open interval from -2 to 2 is the graph of g concave down. Explain your reasoning. For concavity, we have to look at g double prime of x, and since we are given that g of x equals the integral of ft from 0 to x, we do g prime of x equals f of x, and so then g double prime of x equals f prime of x. To determine when it's concave down, g double prime of x has to be less than 0. So therefore, g double prime of x equals f of x. F prime of x has to be less than 0. And if we look at the graph, f prime of x, which is the slope of this, has to be negative, and that's from the interval 0 to 2. So from 0 to 2, g prime of x, g double prime of x equals f prime of x is less than 0, because it's decreasing. So to justify that, we write g of x is concave down on the interval from 0 to 2, because g double prime of x equals f prime of x is less than 0 on this interval.
For part D, they ask to draw a sketch from the graph of g from -2 to 2. We know that this graph is it's g prime of x equals f of x. Therefore, we can read from this graph, since it's f of x, because we're trying to sketch g of x. So for this part, it would be like this curve, because from -2 to -1, it's decreasing, and we can see from here because it's below 0 on g prime of x or f of x. So it's decreasing from here, and from this point it changes to increasing And here it would, to know where you have to draw the point, this one, it would be 1.5, because you just have to plug in this, which is -1, plug it in here to get 1.5. And from here it's a shift from decreasing to increasing, and you can see from here that it changes from negative to positive. So it changes. Here it's increasing until it meets this point, 1.5. From here it's increasing, and from here it's increasing. And then from here it changes again, positive to negative. So it's here decreasing. So g of -2 and g of 0 and g of 2 would be 0, because if each one of them, if you plug it in, it would give you 0. For example, this one, g of -2, if you plug it in here from 0 to -2, it would mean this area minus this area, which would equal 0. And this one, g of 0, from 0 to 0, we know that's 0 as well. And for g of 2, same here, this area minus this area, which will give you 0.